Wow. Okay. So this week's material you sent over is it's pretty intense stuff. We're talking about total equality, right? But not just like basic fairness. This goes way further.
Yeah, it dives right into this almost sci-fi scenario, like something out of Harrison Bergeron, that Kurt Vonnegut story.
Exactly. 2081, everyone's totally equal. On the surface, it sounds like, well, utopia, right?
Right. But then when you start peeling back the layers, it gets, well, kind of nightmarish, to be honest.
Yeah, no kidding. I mean, picture this. You're considered too attractive, bam, you have to wear a mask.
Too smart. They slap an earpiece on you that blasts random noise just to disrupt your thoughts.
And if you're strong or athletic, weights constantly weighing you down. It's like they're actively trying to drag everyone down to the lowest common denominator.
That's the core of it, right? It's this whole idea of enforced mediocrity. Nobody's allowed to excel, to be exceptional in any way.
So, right off the bat, our deep dive's mission is pretty clear. We gotta unpack all this. We're talking about the arguments presented in these sources, the motivations behind this kind of radical leveling, and most importantly, the potential consequences, which, frankly, sound terrifying.
Totally agree. And we've got a great mix of sources to work with, too. You've got excerpts from this YouTube video transcript that analyzes the whole total equality concept, and then some really thought-provoking philosophical perspectives woven in. It's like dystopian fiction meets some serious real-world ideas.
Okay, so let's get into this vision of total equality more deeply. Your YouTube transcript uses Harrison Bergeron as a jumping-off point, which, as we said, is just so vivid and disturbing. But it's important to stress this isn't just about legal equality or even equality of opportunity, right?
No, not at all. It goes way beyond that. This is about enforcing equality of outcome across every single aspect of human existence: intelligence, physical ability, even appearance, like you said, with those masks for the attractive people.
Right. It's like beauty becomes a crime punishable by, mandatory ugliness. And the source even throws in this chilling quote from G.K. Chesterton about a future where everyone is sexless, leading to this temporary fraternity free and equal.
Yeah, Chesterton's point is, well, it's kind of dark. He's implying that this kind of forced sameness, this erasure of fundamental human differences, it wouldn't even last. It'd be self-defeating.
It's so unsettling, right? Like, what are we even left with if we eliminate all those things that make us distinct, that make us individuals? It raises this huge question. Is a so-called utopia built on forced uniformity actually desirable, or is it, as our source suggests, actually a dystopia in disguise?
A really crucial question, and it leads us to another big one. Why are we even so drawn to this idea of total equality in the first place?
Yeah, what's the underlying drive here? Why is this something people would even consider, let alone try to enforce?
Well, the YouTube analysis brings up Viktor Frankl's work, his concept of this unheard cry for meaning in modern society. It's like we've lost those traditional structures and beliefs that used to give life a sense of purpose.
I can definitely see that. Like, we're bombarded with so much information, so many choices, so many competing narratives. It can be overwhelming, disorienting. You start to wonder, what's the point? What does it all mean?
Exactly. And that's where Nietzsche comes in, right? The analysis talks about his idea of nihilism as a consequence of the death of God, the loss of those higher values that once gave us a framework for meaning.
And that famous Nietzsche quote, "We have left the land and have embarked. We have burned our bridges behind us indeed. We have gone further and destroyed the land behind us." It paints this picture of humanity adrift, lost in a vast, meaningless void. Powerful stuff.
It really is. Nietzsche saw this as a fundamental crisis of our time. If there's no overarching divine order, no universally accepted set of values, then where do we find our sense of direction, our purpose?
Right, that's the million-dollar question. And the analysis connects this to the idea that in the absence of those traditional anchors, we've kind of grasped at replacement. Things like fleeting public opinion or the constant distraction of entertainment.
Which, of course, are inherently unstable and ultimately, well, kind of shallow, right? They don't really provide that deep, lasting sense of meaning that many people crave.
And then there's the impact of science, which, while obviously leading to incredible advances, has also contributed to this sense of human insignificance, at least according to the analysis.
Right, like we're just a product of random evolutionary processes, a cosmic accident in a vast and indifferent universe. It's a humbling realization, but it can also leave us feeling kind of lost,
Totally. And I think Albert Camus captured that feeling perfectly in The Myth of Sisyphus. He talks about the absurdity of modern life, the repetitive routines that can seem so pointless, and he describes that moment when the why arises, when you're suddenly hit with this profound sense of meaninglessness.
It's that existential crisis moment, right? You're going through the motions, but you're asking yourself, what's it all for?
Exactly. Now, the analysis doesn't just leave us in this bleak existential void, though. It presents a contrasting perspective, bringing in Bishop Robert Barron.
Right. Barron argues that a truly meaningful life isn't found in this nihilistic void, but rather in connecting to goodness, truth, and beauty, rooted in what he calls the summum bonum.
And just to clarify, summum bonum essentially translates to the highest good, or the ultimate purpose. So for Barron and for many others, this is often tied to a God or a higher power.
It's about aligning ourselves with something greater than ourselves, finding meaning and purpose in something beyond our own individual desires and experience.
And this is where the analysis brings up a really important shift that's happened in modern society, this move away from traditional, universally held value towards a more relativistic world,
where right and wrong become increasingly subjective, determined by individual preferences or cultural norms, rather than some fixed external standard.
And that's where things can get tricky, right? Because, as the source points out, this kind of relativism can lead to some pretty serious dangers.
Absolutely. If everyone becomes the ultimate arbiter of their own truth, their own morality, it can lead to these constant clashes of perspective, this never-ending battle of will.
And in that kind of environment, it's often the strongest will that prevails, which can create the perfect conditions for, well, totalitarian, where conformity is ruthlessly enforced, or a more subtle kind of conformism, where people just go along with the crowd to avoid conflict.
Exactly. And it's here that your source brings up a really powerful example, George Orwell's Animal Farm. It's an allegory that illustrates how this whole pursuit of total equality can actually backfire, leading to a new form of inequality and oppression.
It's such a classic story and so relevant discussion. For anyone who needs a refresher, it's about these animals on a farm who, they overthrow their human farmer, dreaming of this perfectly equal society where every animal is, equal and treated fair.
It starts with the pigs. They're the smartest animals, so they take charge, initially with the best of intention, preaching this gospel of equality. But then, gradually, things start to shift.
Power corrupts, and absolute power corrupts absolutely, right?
Yeah.
The pigs become more and more authoritarian, manipulating the other animals, consolidating their control, and ultimately, that initial idealistic slogan of all animals are equal gets twisted into something much darker.
All animals are equal, but some animals are more equal than others. It's a chilling line and a perfect illustration of how even the most well-intentioned revolutions can go horribly wrong.
And the source brings up a really insightful quote from G.K. Chesterton here. When men choose not to believe in God, they do not thereafter believe in nothing. They then become capable of believing in anything. It's like if you remove that higher authority, that ultimate source of morality and justice, then anything goes.
Which can be really dangerous, obviously. It leaves a vacuum that can be filled by all sorts of ideologies, often with disastrous consequences.
Absolutely. Now, your source then shifts gears a bit, focusing on critiques of modern liberal notions of equality. And it brings up this strange paradox observed by Stephen Fry. He talks about how sometimes those who are most vocal in their demands for liberality can be, surprisingly illiberal in how they try to enforce it.
Right. Exclusive in their calls for inclusivity, homogenous in their demands for heterogeneity, and so on. It's like there's a certain rigidity to their thinking, a kind of enforced conformity that can actually stifle genuine diversity of thought and expression.
And this leads us to, Nietzsche again. The source talks about his concept of the preachers of equality from Thus Spoke Zarathustra. Nietzsche argues that beneath their high-minded rhetoric, there's often this hidden undercurrent of resentment, even a desire for revenge against those they perceive as being unequal to them.
Yeah, it's like they're not actually motivated by a desire to elevate everyone, but rather to punish those who stand out, those who are different, or God forbid, better than them in some way.
And the analysis goes on to unpack Nietzsche's parable of the tarantulas, which is just such a powerful, visceral image. It's about these tarantulas, marked with this black sign of revenge, who represent those who preach equality while secretly plotting to bring everyone down to their level.
They spin these webs of resentment, waiting to strike at anyone who dares to be different, anyone who challenges their worldview. It's pretty disturbing stuff.
And the source quotes Nietzsche directly. For justice speaks to me. Humans are not equal, nor should they become so either. What would my love for the overman be if I spoke otherwise?
It's such a bold statement, and it goes against so much of what we're told to believe about equality.
Totally. And look, Nietzsche isn't saying we should just abandon all notions of fairness and justice, right? His argument is that genuine progress, both individually and as a society, comes from striving for something higher, something beyond this resentment-fueled desire to drag everyone down to the lowest common denominator.
Right. He sees this kind of equality, this forced leveling, as ultimately leading to mediocrity, conformity, and the suppression of everything great and noble in humanity. He calls it a pathos of distance, driven by fear and resentment.
It's a pretty scathing critique of this kind of thinking. And the source goes on to explain Nietzsche's belief that those who champion this form of equality are actually threatened by anything exceptional, anything that disrupts their vision of total sameness. Their goal is to eliminate those differences, to erase them entirely.
And that brings us to this concept of leveling, which the analysis describes as a process of stripping away individuality, distinctiveness, everything that makes us unique and interesting.
Yeah, it's like trying to create this bland, homogenous society where no one stands out, no one excels, which frankly sounds incredibly boring, right?
Not to mention soul crush. And this is where Nietzsche introduces his idea of the last man, the ultimate product of this leveling process.
Someone completely content with mediocrity, lacking any ambition or drive for self-improvement. It's like the embodiment of societal decay, a world populated by zombies who have lost all sense of purpose and individuality.
It's bleak, for sure. And the analysis draws this really unsettling connection between this suppression of individuality in the pursuit of total equality and the rise of totalitarianism. They reference Orwell's 1984 as a chilling example of how enforced conformity can pave the way for a state where individual identity is completely eradicated.
So we've covered a lot of ground here. You've heard all these arguments, these different perspectives on this idea of total equality. What are some key takeaways you'd want to leave our listeners?
I think the most important takeaway is that we need to be really careful about how we define and pursue equality. The sources you shared highlight the potential dangers of aiming for absolute sameness, of trying to erase all individual differences and freedoms.
And it's not just about the potential for tyranny and oppression, right? It's also about the risk of creating a society that's, well, just plain boring, devoid of creativity, innovation, and excellence.
Absolutely. And it's crucial to understand those underlying motivations behind this push for total equality. The sources suggest that it might stem from this deep-seated human need for meaning, especially in a world where traditional frameworks and beliefs have weakened.
And that this search for meaning can sometimes lead people to embrace ideologies that, while seemingly noble on the surface, can ultimately lead to some pretty dark places.
Exactly. So hopefully this deep dive has given our listeners some food for thought. It's not about rejecting equality altogether, but about thinking critically about what kind of equality we're striving for and what the potential consequences might be.
Couldn't have said it better myself. So here's a final thought-provoking question for everyone listening. How do we balance the pursuit of fairness and opportunity for everyone with the recognition and celebration of individual differences and talent? It's about finding that sweet spot where everyone has the chance to thrive while still allowing for the full expression of human individuality. It's a complex challenge, but it's one that's worth grappling with, both in our own lives and in the wider world around us.
It's an ongoing conversation, that's for sure, and one we need to keep having.